Hi, I'm Aldo. Welcome to Plays the Thing, the channel where I share my experiences prepping and playing tabletop role-playing games. This is the fourth episode in the series that I'm calling A Tale of Two One-Shots, and it's the one where we finally get down to business, giving you a play report that tells you what happened when we use Christian Merstam's White Hack 4th edition to run Sean McCulley's published adventure, Mission Excalibur. Let me remind you of the situation. The Nazis have won World War II. They have occupied all of Europe, possibly all of the world. Recently, the Nazis have discovered Excalibur in a castle that overlooks the small English town of Southampton. The Nazis are trying to figure out how to harness Excalibur's power for their own nefarious purpose, but we have three different characters moving on in the situation for various different reasons. The first of these characters is Ian Thatcher. He is a spy and a member of the Resistance, and he was sent by his mentor, Christopher Lee, to either get his hands on Excalibur and bring it back to the Resistance, or to destroy it, to prevent the Nazis from being able to use its power against everybody else. The second character that's moving on in the scene is Una Duran, who is a changeling midwife and folk healer. And she is here because the sister of one of her clients was abducted by the Nazis. The sister's name is Evelyn Clark. And when she was abducted, the Nazis were overheard talking about how her heir would serve the Nazis rather than their defunct king or their imaginary king or something like that. And there was mention, I think, of Excalibur or something like that. So when the Nazis took Evelyn Clark, Una Duran packed her bags and made her way to Southampton. The third person on the scene is Slugger Brown, who is an American soldier who had served in the French Foreign Legion. And the reason he is here is because the commander of this Nazi base murdered a lot of his fellow legionnaires. And so he is here for the sole purpose of killing that commander. He doesn't know anything about Excalibur. And that was the decisions that the players made. They knew about the situation ahead of time, but the players decided to give themselves these motivations for coming. And so that's where we were going to pick up. Now, let's turn over to this map here, because this map is the tool that we used to run this adventure primarily. Sean McCulley has done a great job of setting up this situation to be just that, a situation. When you read the adventure, there's no one right way of doing anything. Instead, he has set up this village, the village of Southampton, and keyed it with all sorts of interesting things that are going on, things that the players have to push into to try to discover, to figure out how they might use what to approach the situation however they decide. There is no this will happen first, this will happen second, this will happen third kind of encounter structure. So it's the exact type of adventure that I'm looking to run these days. All right, so now let's talk about how play proceeded. I decided to have the characters come in two waves. Ian and Slugger Brown were going to come in first. Una was going to come in second. The reason for that is that Una decided to undergo certain preparations, using her miracles to create a series of potions that she'd have available to her. And that was also going to require some rest and recuperation to try to regain the harm points that she would take for doing that. So on the first day, Ian and Slugger came in on the train, which runs down. You can see the tracks there on the map, kind of running from C to P to V to Y, right? And Y is actually the station that stops at Southampton. And so that's where Ian and Slugger Brown got off the train and came into town. Players described their characters to one another, but Slugger Brown and Ian didn't have any relationship. They chose not to, in terms of telling me why they were here. So they gave kind of like polite nods at each other as they came into town, but they basically went about their own business. Interestingly enough, they both basically took the same route in. They took that main drag in the town that you see if you look at the map from the keyed location U to T to O to K to I. They came into town following that trajectory. As they were about halfway down around the O position, they noticed a Nazi vehicle, kind of like a Jeep, come around a corner with a bunch of Nazis on there, kind of yelling things at people that were on the street. They almost ran over a woman that was walking down the side of the street with her child. They hurled insults at her as they drove by, and they gave the two-player characters kind of dirty looks, made eye contact with them, but the player characters didn't respond, so the Jeep just drove on by, and both Ian and Slugger continued. Then, again, although they weren't together, they both found their way to I, the key location I, which was the Drug and Trumpet pub. There, they sat down to have a drink and to kind of get a lay of the land. The pub was run by a man named Old John, who had done his best to maintain the spirit of a community that exists in a small English pub in an English town, and was doing his level best to run a place that captured that, despite the oppressive nature of what everybody else was feeling. So it was a place where people could look into people's eyes and catch a spark of something that had been there before, but a wistfulness also that it was so under so much duress. So the characters tried to gather a little bit of information from talking to the folks here. They didn't really get very much. Slugger Brown did manage to secure a spare room that Old John had. Ian Thatcher finished his drink and moved on out of here and towards a location where he knew he'd be able to find information, which was keyed location Q. And keyed location Q was the home of Ted and Florence Sexton, who were shopkeepers, a married couple that are shopkeepers. They were a lot of fun to play because they are these kind of mild-mannered shopkeeper types, but with pistol and carbine, being very careful, but also very pleasant and friendly once they let him in. And so Ian went there and had a long conversation with them, and got kind of a broader lay of the land. There he asked about two things. When he had come in to see them, he had taken a slightly different route, and he had passed by Q location S, right? So he had gone back down the drag almost towards the beginning of where he entered town, and then gone from S to Q. And when he had passed S, he had noticed a man that was looking out the second story window of a home, kind of like looking wistfully out the window. And Ian was unsure about who that person was and was maybe concerned about who he was. So he asked the Sextons about him. The Sextons explained that was one Cleveland Pudding, who was kind of a Lon Chaney style actor that had a big career before the war, but was now just kind of retired here and, like everybody else, kind of somewhat in despair over what life has become. But he said he's harmless enough. He's not a member of the resistance or anything like that, but he's also not a Nazi sympathizer. The Sextons also explained a little bit about who the command staff was for the base that was up in the castle, which is up in location A. Basically gave a general lay of the land. Oh, and they also told him that if he wanted to find a place where the Nazis and the locals interacted most, it would be keyed location G, which is the Stillwater Hall Hotel, which has been kind of turned into kind of a brothel / tavern where people interacted, not in the healthiest of ways, but there was kind of a lot of crossover between the town folk and the Nazis there. Ian didn't feel like making his way over there on this first night, and especially not maybe tipping the Nazis off to his presence, so he basically decided to bed down for the night and maybe continue his investigations the next day. For his part, Slugger Brown did take a little jaunt out after securing a room over at the Dog and Trumpet, and he did notice a little bit more Nazi activity. He noticed another Jeep coming in, this one with a lone cadet driving, who turned down into the alley over in keyed location N, went into the building that was there, came out, got back in his Jeep, and then drove back in the direction of keyed location A, which is the castle where the Nazis are headquartered. Slugger Brown made note of that, but he didn't follow up. He didn't get close to the the building, didn't know exactly what was going on. He just kind of like noted that happened and just went back to the Dog and Trumpet. One thing that he did do that night is that he went out into the area behind the Dog and Trumpet, right? So like to the edge of the fens. If you look at key location B, all of that is the fens. And he kind of looked across with binoculars in the direction of the castle to see if he could notice anything. But from that distance, he could see that there's some people stationed up there, some soldiers stationed up there, but he couldn't get too much of a lay of the land from that position and that location. So he bedded down and decided to wait for the next day as well. So then we began play with the next day, and we have the activities of Una Duran, who came in on the same train. And rather than follow that same drag that the other characters had the first day, the UTOKI kind of drag there on the map, she actually made her way over to location X, keyed location X, and made her way down that drag instead. At key location X, she noticed that there was a Panzer tank that was stationed there, and there was a crew, a relatively small crew, but a crew of Nazis nonetheless that were maintaining it and all of that. She then continued down that road past the sexton's home. So Ian Thatcher actually noticed her while he was having his breakfast. And then she was looking very specifically. She said, I am looking for something like a shopkeeper sign or something that would suggest a doctor or a druggist or a chemist or something like that, because she herself is a folk healer. So she figured that might be some sort of inn that she could have into the town. And she did indeed find that at location N, which, if you recall, is the same location that Slugger Brown noticed that Nazi cadet coming and interact with. It's a druggist's business. So Una came in and she encountered the druggist, whose name is Oberon Sims. Now, Oberon Sims has reason to be careful. You know, he does have ongoing business when the Nazis in town. Una's player, Jason, said that he wanted Una to charm Oberon Sims. And so we had him make a roll. She was kind of using her Fey charm, her Fey glamour to kind of affect this. So it's not like a charm person spell or anything like that. She has that as well, but this was more like using her otherworldly charisma to try to kind of like and not entrance him, but really charm him. Una got a double positive roll on this and rolled the same number twice, which is the best possible result that you can get in the game. So based on that, I had that charm really succeed. And Oberon struck up a conversation with her, hit it off, and before you know it, he was saying, well, like, look, if you're in town and you need a place to stay, I do have a spare room downstairs. And in fact, if you're here for any duration, I could use your expertise. You know, I've been lonely in terms of like I don't have people to talk shop with and whatnot. And sure, he was also charmed in other ways by her, but he offered her, innocently enough, a place to sleep here and to stay here in a spare room at the bottom and to work here as well as kind of an assistant for him. And so she was very grateful for that and started to sort of settle in. I almost forgot to mention, Oberon did make one condition. After he'd made the offer, he paused and said, but there is one thing that you have to do. A week from yesterday, there will be a Nazi cadet coming here to do some business. When he comes, and he comes like clockwork, once a week, the same day, same time, you have to not be visible. I don't want them to know that you're here. You can't ask me any questions about the business that I do with them, for your safety and for mine. Do you understand? And she said, of course I do. Not a problem. And then, again, that double positive roll was meaningful. So he said, okay, good. And we're fine. And they moved on. After settling in, Jason told me that Una was going to leave and go out. And that specifically that she was going to go out of town and make her way toward the river. So kind of across the fens and toward the river that ran next to the castle. And I didn't know exactly why Jason was doing this or was having Una do this, but he did. And this was interesting because it was a moment where she was able to kind of at least softly interact with some of the other characters. She came out. Ian Thatcher had noticed her and was curious, so he was kind of shadowing her. Ian saw her like slip down towards the main road, walk down the street where she kind of saw Slugger Brown hanging out and just kind of sitting in the front of the Dog and Trumpet and kind of watching town. And then she went past I and past the Dog and Trumpet and went into the fens. And Ian tried to trail her, but she noticed him. So they had an interaction. We're like, where are you going? It's like, I'm just going to go see I'm going to commune with nature, so to speak. He's like, well, it's dangerous out here. Do you mind company? And she kind of accepted, and they both kind of walked out there. And then Jason explained that Una was going to go to the river and collect bottles of water. At this point, I have no idea why he's doing this. He's just telling me that Una's doing this. And so that's what Una's doing. Now, I should say, as Game Master, I'm making random encounter rules for different reasons throughout play so far. Every time we kind of shift the scene, I'm making a roll, and I'm making a roll to see if there's an encounter with aggressive Nazis, to see if they are noticed by some of the people who are informants for the Nazis who are in town, or when they're out in the fens, there's actually other dangers, different, more supernatural dangers that they can encounter out there. And I'm rolling, and I'm getting nothing. Right? There's no random encounters are coming up, and I'm not going to force anything at this point. So they go out, they collect the water, they come back, and again, Slugger Brown sees them coming back with muddied, shoes and stuff like that. And then Ian and Una come into the Dog and Trumpet to have a drink. So they have a drink, and while they're there, Una gets a sense that Ian's about more than just what he appears on the surface, and asks him for more information, and he declines. He says, this is not the place to talk. Looking around, he doesn't trust us here. I need you to, why don't you come over to my friend's home, the Sextons? I'm their nephew, and we can discuss this over breakfast. Una, however, then went back to her place at Oberon Sims, and then I figured out why she went to collect the bottles of water, because Jason asked if he could use that water in a scrying spell. She found like a silver platter in Oberon Sims' home, took it into her own little room, poured the water into that to create a reflective surface, and use that as a way of being able to cast one of her scrying spell that she has on her character sheet, to be able to figure out where Evelyn Clark was. So she cast it and was able to ask me two questions. The first question that she asked is, where is Evelyn Clark? And the scrying revealed to her that she was in a horrible situation where she was being taken advantage of by one of the Nazi men who was in a lab, dressed in a lab coat and all of that, and that was happening in the laboratory situation. So horrified by that, she panned out and was like, reveal to me a way that I can get to her safely. Reveal to me a way in which I can get into the castle unnoticed, I think is what she asked. That was great, because the way that Sean McCulley has written this adventure, I think there's a section there where he says there are 3 ways that the characters could maybe exploit to get in here. So I simply rolled a d3 to see which one the mirror would reveal to her, and the mirror revealed that there was, if you could scale the wall, that at the very top of one of the tower, that there was a room that was unguarded that you can just slip into. It was like I think the adventure says that it's a place that used to be used as kind of like a pigeon coop, like an aviary kind of area, and that was unguarded and open, right, unlocked and open to the elements, so that that's what the river, the mirror, or the scrying spell revealed to her in terms of a way that she can gain access into the place. After completing her scrying, Una did one more thing before turning in for the night, and that was that she wanted to know what that secret business that Oberon had going with that cadet was. So while he was asleep, she searched his office and she found a book of accounts where he had recorded a regular sale of heroin to that cadet every week. With that, she put everything back in place and she turned in for the night. Another thing that happened that evening is that Slugger Brown went to the castle at night and kind of gave it a once over to get a sense of what the defenses were. He noticed that there was like a 50 caliber machine gun mounted on a platform that overlooked the main entrance to the castle. He noticed that there were certain garden placements, but he didn't make any moves that night. Instead, he returned back to the Dog and Trumpet. Intent, I think, by the way, I'm making an assault that third night here. The night's events concluded, the characters went to bed, and the next morning when they woke up, Una came over to the Sexton's home and had breakfast with Ian. There, Ian explained that he was a member of the Resistance and he needed to get his hand on Excalibur, and that he suspected that she had similar business in the castle. She said, "Yes, I'm here to rescue my friend Evelyn Clark, and it might be tied to your Excalibur thing because the Nazis are trying to find a way of exploiting her to make sure that her heir, her unborn child, will be, able to wield some sort of power." That was probably, they reasoned, the power of Excalibur to use for their nefarious purposes. So at that point, they both agreed that they would be going in together. With that, Una also revealed what she'd learned from her scrying, that there was a laboratory that she saw Evelyn was being kept in, and that there was a way in from the top, if they can get to the top tower. Ian asked the Sextons if they can get their hands on like climbing gear and stuff like that. They said, absolutely not a problem. We're going to get all that together for you. They made a list of equipment that they wanted, but they also shared that they knew that there was a washerwoman in town, Marguerite, who had access to the castle. They didn't know exactly if she was sympathetic or not to the Nazis, but they knew that the Nazis had apparently provided her with easy access to the castle, a key essentially to one of the side doors, to, if you will, to the castle, so she can get in and out with her laundry. So Una and Ian decided that they would go and try to maybe find a way of getting carted into the castle by this woman. At this point, as game master, I'm not sure which entry point they're going to exploit, because now they have two things. They have the thing up at the tower, if they could scale it and come in through that unguarded space, or they can use Marguerite's entry point. And at this point, it seemed like that's what they were going to do. They were talking about like distracting her to be able to kind of get into, or at least get Una into the laundry cart, and that they would get into the castle in that way. But it was a little convoluted. It was one of those player moments where they're kind of going back and forth and deciding, and they're not quite sure what they're going to do yet. But they wanted to explore that enough. They decided to go out and find Marguerite as she was making her way to the castle this very morning. And they went out there, and at this point, Una did cast kind of a charm person spell to get Marguerite to focus on her and tell her all about it. And Marguerite said, "Oh yes, I have a thing going. I have a little affair going with one of the guards, and he's always stationed downstairs at this particular point, and he trusts me enough that he gave me the key. And do you have yourself a lover here as well with them?" Oh, she was kind of like playing back and forth with all of that. And while she was distracted, they messed up her laundry because they got her laundry dirty, so she'd have to redo it, because they wanted to delay her enough so that they can get their gear together, so they can put whatever plan they were going to get put into effect. And so they were able to accidentally ruin her load, and she was like, "Oh, and I have to do it all over again." But the charm spell was still on, so she was like, "I know you didn't mean it, blah blah blah." But she turned her cart around and she went back to get the laundry done. And at that point, Ian was able to score to pilfer a Nazi officer's uniform to be able to kind of maybe use in the infiltration. One last thing, while all this was going on, Slugger Brown was still kind of stalking around, looking at people in the town and seeing what they were up to, and he noticed all this whole interaction with Marguerite, and he noticed that Una had done something supernatural, right, in casting the charm spell. And given that he's had a thing with supernatural stuff before in terms of the commandant of this Nazi base, wiping out his crew through some sort of connection to magic, he thought, this is something that I need to pay attention to. So Slugger was sort of interested now in finding out more about what was going on, not just with the Nazis here at the tower, but also with Una in particular. And with that event, we concluded the night's session of play. This was meant to be a one-shot, but there's so much going on in this adventure. There's so much that's laid out, and there's no directing the action. There's no encounter 1, encounter 2, encounter 3 situation. Instead, players can explore this and figure out what it is they're going to do and invent whatever they want to do in terms of their course of action. And so because of that, there was so much, it was so rich, and we only touched on like a quarter of what's available in this short adventure. But because of that, we didn't finish, so we ended up going a second night. And unfortunately, I think we are out of time for today, so we'll do one more play report, a part 2, where we will tell you how it all ended up, and that'll be next time. So in the meantime, thank you so much for watching. As always, I wish you good health, I wish you good cheer, I wish you good gaming. Goodbye.